So let's then come to Psalm 5 and think about it. Psalm 5, I think, is part of a set of psalms, a group of psalms, probably Psalms 1 to 7. And the background, the context to those psalms is probably the rebellion of Absalom against David. That is what is referred to in the superscription at Psalm 3, a psalm of David when Absalom rebelled against him. And a commentator whom I was reading recently was making the point that probably this is the context of this opening set of psalms that we have in our Bibles. So David is in this position of being under threat. His own son is rebelling against him. There's family trouble. He's had to flee from the throne. He's in hiding. He's fearful for his life. He doesn't know what is going to happen next. And so it's possibly the next morning, so after the night that he has learned that Absalom has basically rebelled against him and is going to take his life, this is maybe the next morning when he's crying out to God in this time of prayer. That could well be the context. It seems to fit. That's what some of the theologians and the commentators would say. But imagine this. Somebody coming to this psalm in Dromore Main Street, okay? And they might say this to you. Why bother praying? It seems strange and archaic. Look, there are guys in gowns who read prayers in churches, and at times of bereavement, people say to you, I'm praying for you, I'll remember you in my prayers, and you're in my thoughts. But the kind of prayer that's in this psalm, no way, no way. All that crying and that deep stuff, it sounds like far too much work. That's extreme. It's ancient biblical stuff. It can't be for 2024. No way. And then what about all this punishment talk in this psalm? Punishment? We're in 2024. You know, yeah, okay, there have to be boundaries, there have to be laws to protect us because there are bad guys out there, but deceivers, and I mean boasters, are they really going to be punished? Sure, we all deceive a bit, we all boast a bit, we all tell the odd wee white lie. I mean, like, you can't go totally over the top about this punishment thing either. Look, things have moved on. You need to get into the 21st century. And this blessing thing, blessing? I mean, look at it. Look at the world. Look at what's happening. There's nothing in this world for me. Look at my life. Look at what's going on in my life. Everything is going up. The prices are all going up, and my salary isn't. And then there's these waiting lists, and there's wars, and to cap it all, there's potholes. Do you really expect me to thank a God who would allow my young friend to become so ill? These are just some of the objections that the folks out there could well make to a psalm like this. And we can understand it. We can understand it. You know, we can understand how people would look at this psalm. But in this psalm, I will put it to you, and I know that you'll most likely be in agreement with me, that all of those objections to a Christian worldview are actually answered in this psalm, in this old believer song, in the song that this old believer sings. What does he sing about first? Here he is, under pressure, under attack, and he sings about the grammar of prayer. The grammar of prayer. I don't know what your grammar's like. Unfortunately, I have to teach grammar to P5s. That's why I've got grey hair. But look, grammar isn't always easy. But there's grammar in this psalm. There's grammar. There's, first of all, the grammar of personal pronouns. Personal pronouns. So that's where something belongs to me, my. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Listen to what he says. Consider my groaning. Hear or heed the sound of my cry for help. My King and my God, for to you I pray. Personal pronouns. Me, I, we, our. Personal pronouns. In the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning, I will order my prayer to you and eagerly watch. It's my. We sometimes hear people tell us, and I've heard this before, you come to the prayer meeting and it's not all about you. It shouldn't be all me. Shouldn't be, but in this psalm at the same time, you have to realize here and see here that there are times when you do need to put your requests to God, and that is perfectly legitimate and the right thing to do. It is undoubtedly true that in prayer, we have to acknowledge the greatness of God and extol him. It's our Father who is in heaven that we must, extol and rejoice in and exalt. But there is a sense in which he wants us, to come to him and to pour out our requests to him. As I was saying to you, I'm a teacher. I have a class of P5s. They're 8-year-olds at the minute, and they're sweet. But boy, do they like expressing their needs. We're talking here, folks, from 8:30 in the morning, expressing their needs. Can I? When will it be break time? Can I go to the toilet? Are we going to have PE after break? Are we going to have homework tonight? Etc., etc. It's all about me. And then I have to remind myself, when I've had maybe 100 of these from 8:30 in the morning, I have to remember that you might get impatient with them and you might think, I've heard enough of this. But these are only children, And these children are learning. And these children are at a point in their development where they are very me-focused and self-focused. And they are very aware of their needs and their wants. And believe it or not, they see me as someone who can meet those needs. Poor kids. And so it's right and proper, in a sense, for those children to come to me, their teacher, and say, can we go? Because I'm in charge of them. The Lord is your God and your King. He's your what? Your heavenly Father. Will you not go to him? Jesus talks about that. Will you not come to your Father? If you ask your father for bread, will he give you a stone? Asking your Father. Jesus is talking about that. The relationship. You come to the one whom you believe to have the love and the capacity and the ability to meet your needs. Personal pronouns. The verbs next of his prayer, of David's prayer, where he's pouring out his heart to God. Give, that's the doing words. Give ear. Consider. Heed, you will hear. He asks God to do these things for him because he really believes that God can do these things for him, because he's a sovereign, covenant-keeping God. He's his God and his King, his Lord, in charge of his life, ruling over his life. I will order my prayer to you. I pray, I eagerly watch. These are things that he does in relation to God, because he believes that God can do these great things for him. He will meet his need. He believes he's coming to an all-powerful God who will show him great grace and mercy. He comes with a sense of fervor and great expectancy. And that's why he uses these names, as I mentioned, for God. He calls him his Lord, he calls him his God, and he calls him his King. He calls him his King. So that's amazing. He's a God who rules supremely and sovereignly, and yet relates personally to David. So that's the verbs. A God who can do exceedingly, abundantly, above all that we ask or think. Do you come to this great God believing that? Bringing your needs to him? Or you get anxious and worried and full of care and get yourself really, really annoyed and fearful because you think that your needs will not be met. You have these problems, you have these difficulties, but are you coming to a great God whom you believe can meet your need. Thirdly, notice the nouns of his prayer. The nouns of his prayer. Give ear to my words. These are the naming words, the names of things, his words. Consider my groaning. Heed the sound of my cry for help. Sound, cry, help. Hear my voice. You could summarize it like this. He wants God to understand the deepest needs of his soul. We might call it his anguish of soul. His inner pain about the difficulties that he finds himself in. It's as Romans talks about in chapter 8, 26 to 27, these groanings. Sometimes you're coming to God in prayer and you've got problems that you're facing and you just don't know where to turn and it's just so difficult. What can you do? You can hardly express it in words. Have you ever felt that experience or been in that experience? It's just so difficult to express. It's so kind of overwhelming. The whole problem is so great and you can't see a way out of it, and you're just crying to God in a sense, please help me. You can't even hardly find the words to express it. As one commentator called Barnes says, deep, unuttered groanings, which could not be uttered in language. That's sort of the idea of this groaning that he's doing. Charles Haddon Spurgeon says, my brothers and sisters, sometimes we cannot put our prayers into words. They are nothing but a cry, but the Lord can comprehend the meaning, for he hears a voice in our cry. He hears a voice in our cry. Amazing. He hears a voice in our cry. Are you crying to God because he hears that voice in your cry? He hears your voice. He knows you. And Jesus knows you better than anyone. Jesus knows your heart. He knows your struggles. He knows what you're going through. And he cares more than anyone else. And he understands more than anybody else. And he's a sympathetic high priest, for we do not have a high priest who is not sympathetic with our sufferings, but one who is in every point tempted like as we are, yet without sin. That's the kind of high priest we have. That's the king whom we have today, King Jesus, who understands and sympathizes and knows what you're going through and has been there. The grammar of his prayer. Secondly, notice the algebra of punishment. The algebra of punishment. Verses 4 to 6. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness, and evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. And then also in verses 8 to 10. Verse 9, for example, for there is no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. And so on. This is difficult. This is strong stuff about the reality of a God who punishes sin and holds wrongdoers to account. Folks don't like that today. They don't like the idea of a God who punishes sin. And yet David is singing about this God as he wakes up, possibly the morning after he has heard about the rebellion that his own son is causing. He's singing about punishment. And the reality of punishment, the reality of an all-powerful, ruling, reigning, yet relatable God who is also a judge, the supreme judge of the universe. Now, the implications of judgment and of punishment are immense in the universe. There has to be judgment and punishment. There's a punishment algebra at work in the universe. Rules and principles and standards of morality and right and wrong that make things work together and make them work properly. These things all go together. I mean, if there's no punishment, there's no right or wrong, there's no morality, there is no sense of what is good, there is no sense of what is wrong, there is no ultimate good, there is no God, there are no penalties that have to be paid by perpetrators. what is there? If there is no punishment, there is no God. The algebra of punishment. And so the first rule of this algebra of punishment that we see here outlined in this psalm is that punishment is rooted in the very character of God, the very character of God. For he is not a God who takes delight in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. A holy God cannot look upon sin. A holy, perfect, righteous God cannot look upon moral iniquity and wickedness. And boasters and those who do iniquity, workers of iniquity, and those who speak falsehood, and the bloodthirsty murderers shall not stand before him. In other words, the very character of God demands that these things be held to account and ultimately punished. So that's part of the algebra of punishment that is at work in this world. The God of holiness must punish that which is wrong and sinful. Punishment is rooted in his character. Secondly, punishment is demanded by sin. Look at how he describes his enemies in verse 9. There is nothing reliable in what they say. Their inward part is destruction itself. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. And this is quoted, verse 9 is quoted, part of it is quoted in Romans chapter 3, as I'm sure you know. Romans chapter 3. And the teaching of Romans chapter 3 is that all are guilty before God. Well, listen to Romans chapter 3 from verse 9. What then? Are we better than they? That is comparing Gentiles with Jews. Not at all. For we have already charged that both Jews and Greeks are all under sin. All have sinned. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands. There is no one who seeks out God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good. There is not even one. Their throat is an open grave. That's from Psalm 5. With their tongues they keep deceiving. So you see what Paul does. He takes the quotation from Psalm 5. He slots it into what his teaching in the letter to the Romans. And he's, what would you say? He is enlarging the point. He is generalizing the point. And he's making the clear teaching and theological teaching that all have sinned. So what actually David, hundreds and thousands of years ago, was talking about was everybody. It's actually a general teaching, a general truth. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Paul, as Calvin puts it so well, Paul therefore does not wrest or pull out these words from their genuine meaning. That is Psalm 5, when he applies them to all mankind, but asserts with truth that David showed in them what is the character of the whole humanity fallen by nature. The whole human family fallen by nature. Amazing. That is what we are. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And then the third point is this, that punishment is to be borne by the guilty. Look at verse 10. Hold them guilty, O God. David acknowledges that guilt before a holy God is not something you just take or leave. It's not irrelevant. It's not going to just go away. He will hold them guilty. Hold them guilty. They will have to come before his bar, and they will have to give an account of what they have done and what we have done. Their devices ultimately will go bad, go wrong for them, will trip them up. By their own devices they will fall. In the multitude of their transgressions, thrust them out, for they are rebellious against you. Over the last, obviously, period of time, we've all seen these terrible injustices that have been committed against people. We saw it happening in Dublin with the families in that disco fire, and how they had to wait for, I think, somewhere around 40 years to actually get justice about their loved ones who were killed in the fire. And then we've seen it also with regard to the postmasters and postmistresses who were, for maybe 20 years, wrongly accused, and they were told that they had done wrong, and yet it was all down to total corruption, mismanagement, and telling of lies. It was workers of iniquity, to put it in biblical language, who were actually at fault here, who were corrupting a system and blaming innocent men and women. Yet God will hold them ultimately to account. And we see that in many of these justice issues that we have going on at the present time, that it seems to be very, very difficult to actually hold people to account. They bring them before committees and they bring them before hearings. And they give them a fair trial, and that's absolutely important. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. That's absolutely fundamental. But it does seem that these inquiries never really appear to lead to a kind of holding of individuals to account. But there is coming a day when they will, and we will be held to account before a holy God. And if I could just say one thing about David's psalm, David's song, it's very much issue-focused on that morning, and he's concerned about his own situation and what has been happening to him and his son and his rebellion against him. And he's wanting his enemies to be held to account, and he's wanting God to hold them to account and to deal with them in light of that. But he seems to just do something that Romans chapter 3 corrects, as it were. And that is, he kind of leaves himself out of this equation, out of this algebra of punishment at this time. Now, I'm not saying he did that, but it seems that in this song, you could think that he has not put himself in this equation as well. Although I'm sure in his own heart he did. But we must never leave ourselves out of the algebra equation of punishment. Okay, there are those who do wrong, but remember, we also do wrong. Their sin plus my sin equals rebellion, equals guilt, equals punishment, equals being thrust out of God's presence. In other words, always see your own sin in any situation. In the algebra of punishment, we need to always see our own sin, according to Romans chapter 3, which gives us the New Testament perspective on the algebra of punishment. And so in any situation, in any breakdown of relationships, could I say, whether it's husband-wife, whether it's church members, whether it's relationships with those around you, even with your children, where parents have to correct their children and point out to them where they are wrong. But always just remember that you yourself are not perfect. You yourself are in Romans chapter 3. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. That includes you and me. We're all in this together. We're all in this equation. All of us. There is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understands. There is none that seeks after God. All have sinned. All have sinned. Me as well. So I have some grievance, say, for example, against a brother or a sister, or I feel wronged, and I give the reasons within my own heart, like David is doing here with regard to his own son. I give the reasons, and I bring this before God, and I say, look, Lord, they have done wrong here. Hold them guilty. But I also need to remember that I too have done wrong, that I too am held guilty before a holy God. And all I'm saying is, never leave yourself out of the equation of sin and of punishment, the algebra of punishment. You're in it too. So am I. We all are. And sometimes, it would be a lot better if we were quicker to actually see that we're in that equation too, rather than trying to just always extract ourselves from it and blame the other person. I was telling you about my P5s. Very, very quick to point the finger. Oh, she looked at me. She's looking at me. She's looking at me. He did this to me. He said this about me. She won't let me play. I'm being kept out of their game. Now, maybe all those things are happening, and we have to look at them. We have to sit people down. But I always say to them, look, and this is very, very simple. I know this. I say, when you've one finger pointing at someone, there are three pointing back at yourself. So I get them to look at this. I say, look, how many are pointing back at you? And they say, 3. Okay, thirdly, let's come to the artistry of grace. The artistry of grace. Verse 7. These are beautiful, beautiful, beautiful words. But I, through the abundance of your steadfast love, will enter your house. I will bow down toward your holy temple in the fear of you. Verses 11 to 12. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exult in you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as with a shield. What a contrast. The guy who was a moment ago crying out in anguish and calling on God to crush his enemies is now doing what? Singing in his heart with rapturous joy. How is that possible? How can you, on one hand, be calling out for God to punish your enemies, and then, on the other hand, then a moment later be on the mountaintop of happiness? How can he appear to be hopeless and in the next breath wildly happy? The reason for these two things in one person is that Christians are two-dimensional. Two-dimensional. We are in this world, but we're not of it. We are in this world, yet there is a heavenly mindedness about us. We are in another world. We are in Christ, and yet we are in the world. And we are not bound by this world. We look beyond this world to the unseen spiritual realities, to what Paul calls the things that are above. Now, my dad was a lot of different things, but one of the things he was an artist. And we grew up with him when I was very young, I suppose. He would have painted these massive, big, abstract paintings, probably the size of that window up there. Huge. And they were all these geometric shapes, geometric designs with different color variations, and he used sprayers to do it all. I haven't a clue what it all meant, but he probably did. There are some of these, and he would have said, this is a landscape and this is Loch Ness. And I would have looked at it and thought, where is Loch Ness? Where is the landscape? It's just lines, it's blue, it's got these strange designs. You see, the thing was, I couldn't see anything to that, but he could, because he was the artist. To me, it was abstract, it was meaningless, it was misshapen, but he knew what was there, because he was the one who'd done it. He could see it. He had a purpose in it all. And it's like our lives, isn't it? They sometimes appear abstract, meaningless, misshapen. We sometimes maybe ask, what is the Lord doing? We can't see the meaning of it. Maybe we even doubt, is there a meaning at all in it? Is there a purpose in this at all? People can think of Job. Think of Job. Think of how he lost everything. And his life was turned upside down. And his Christian brothers come to him, and instead of encouraging him and instead of helping him to really understand what was happening in his life, what do? They say, Job, what have you done? Job, what have you done? This is something that you have done. It's all your fault. But the reality is that God is the painter of our lives, and he's painting your life, according to this psalm, with a brush of blessing, folks. A brush of blessing. He's painting your life with a brush of blessing. And he's adding textures and tones of grace and mercy and compassion. And he's surrounding your life. He's framing your life in a frame of what he calls here, what is it? This amazing Old Testament word, chesed, steadfast love. Steadfast love. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. It's framing your life. Sovereign grace. Grace that breaks the bonds of sin. Grace that brings you into his presence. Grace that reached down and saved you and drew you up out of the pit and forgave your sins. Grace that is enlightening you. Grace that is bringing you through this life. Step by step, day by day, moment by moment. Sovereign grace is leading you and guiding you and protecting you, so that nothing can pluck you out of God's hand. Nothing can pluck you out of Jesus' hand. You're safe and secure in Jesus. And as the psalmist says, we're surrounded on every side, covered with favor as with a shield, fortified, protected, invincible on all sides. Nothing will get through. No enemy will break through. Certain safety. And what should our response to this amazing grace be, and this amazing protection that he has around us, and this real steadfast love that almost you cannot translate, because hesed is so rich in all of its different meanings. It's grace, it's mercy, it's compassion, it's love, it's kindness, it's strength. Our response should be worshipping. That's why we come here. That's what this is all about. It's worshipping. Happiness, the worshipping one coming before his tabernacle with fear in our hearts, realizing who he is. Happiness, verse 11. But all who take refuge in you rejoice, and sing for joy. In actual fact, it could be translated shout for joy. This is an overwhelming joy. This is a joy that is expressed. It's deep delight for God. It's exulting. It's like literally jumping for joy. But how does that come about? How is this psalmist able to do this? How is this songwriter able to do this? How are we able to do it? Well, it goes back to that algebra, doesn't it? That algebraic problem. I'm not great at algebra, to be honest with you. And thankfully, God has blessed us with a man in our church called Jim, who is a mathematician. And if I have algebra problems, I go to Jim and he can solve them. And he writes you out this answer. It's fantastic. It's great. Any algebra problem, I just go to him. Any maths problem, and he sorts it out just like that. Solves all the problems. It's great to have a person like that. It's just absolutely wonderful. Here's a problem that even Jim can't solve. The problem of our sin. Because this algebra is insoluble. Sin plus sin plus sin, my sin and your sin equals rebellion, equals punishment. That is without a solution. You can't solve that problem. So how are you going to get to this point where you're jumping for joy? How can a sinner, who is under God's judgment, and deserving of his punishment, and will be held accountable for all the wrongs that have been committed against a holy God in our minds, in our lives, in the things that we do, things that we think. What can we do? What is the answer? Well, there is no answer as far as we can manage in our own strength. But the good news is this: grace tells us this, that God found the answer. God himself solved this insoluble algebra equation of our sin and the punishment due to it, because God stepped in the person of his Son. Jesus Christ stepped in, as Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 5:21, for he has made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. God stepped in, sent his Son. He came in, he did for us what we could not do for ourselves. He solved the problem. He solved the equation of punishment in our place by taking that punishment that we deserved, by taking our guilt upon himself, by standing in our place. All of our sin, all of our guilt, David's guilt, even Absalom's guilt. If Absalom came to the Lord and repented, our sins were laid on him. He took them upon himself in our place. And he stood before a holy God and he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? Why have you thrust me out? Why have I borne this punishment? Why? For us, for you, for me, for all who trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. So will this God ever forsake you? No. Will this God who did not spare his own Son but gave him up for us all, will he ever leave you with those issues and those problems that you have in your life? Is he? Impossible. The God who sent his own Son is on your side. He will never leave you or forsake you. He has covenanted himself to be your God. And the blood of his Son is the proof of that. He will never leave you or forsake you. He's never going to abandon you. He's never going to walk out on you. He's never going to leave you to your own devices to go into that courtroom at the end of life and go before a holy judge all by yourself in your own sin. No. He said, I'll take your sin upon myself. I will take the judgment and the punishment that you deserve, and I will go into that courtroom and I will bear the punishment in your place so that you go free. You're free. What a reason to shout for joy, to jump for joy and sing. What a reason for a happy life. What a reason to be a happy human being in this world. Go home today. Rejoice. Go home and be thankful for what he has done for you. You worry about your kids. We all do. Don't worry. Commit them to God. Be happy in what Jesus has done for you. Be happy that Jesus will look after them. Don't worry about that career problem. You're surrounded as with a shield. Don't worry about what those folks are saying about you. Don't worry about people pointing the finger at you. Don't worry about it. Jesus has taken the punishment that you deserved. God the Father pointed the finger at his Son and he said, you will bear their punishment in their place. And he took that upon himself, and you go free. The finger will never be pointed at you again. And then just in closing, similarly, let's not point the finger at others. As we have been forgiven, let's forgive, folks. as we have been shown such grace, let's show grace to your wife, to your husband, to your church member, to your colleagues. I know it's not easy. It's not always easy. But He will give us the strength to do it. If we have such a sense of ourselves being forgiven, let's show that willingness to forgive, willingness to love, willingness to accept those around us for Jesus' sake.